Yes?
I understand that he was considering his wife in the decision to wait until her death, but do you have any thoughts about why he didn't move to free his slaves earlier when he was there and he could have maybe helped with the transition and helped with the issue of people that were committed to other slave owners?
Well, I suppose part of it is that he only came back to Mount Vernon full-time in 1796. So, but it, as we have been talking about earlier this morning, these are imperfect people. And what we might wish he had done, which is to never acquire a slave, he also didn't do earlier in his life. And so the timetable I can't speak to. I think he was hopeful, and there are letters in the 1780s, just before the Constitutional Convention, where he's writing to people planting the idea that the legislature will abolish slavery. Famously, he sat silently, non-committal in the Constitutional Convention, but that was in essence to sanction the proceedings, but not to take a partisan place. But he wrote those letters, and there may have been some hope. We know that the Three-Fifths Compromise came about in the Constitutional Convention as a compromise between the people who wanted no slavery and those who insisted and said they wouldn't be part of it otherwise. So maybe he had a hope that this would become a legislative solution at the national level, at the founding level. It's hard to know. But what I'm impressed by is, and that's why I kept you so long on those last paragraphs, there are many wills in which slaves are freed, or they're manumitted in a line. I've seen many, many such texts. I've never seen anybody lay out such conditions and hammer it down that my executors and their successors are not to evade this. And I mean, I want to execute it on time. He's very punctilious about it. So his feeling when he drafted the will was strong. Ironically, Virginia, in 1801, passed a law making it illegal, as we know from Frederick Douglass's story in Maryland, passed a law making it illegal to teach slaves to read and write. So his state and even the country, electing Jefferson, were moving in a different direction, just at the moment where he hoped it would continue to emancipate. Yes?
I think it's serendipitous that we would go over this today when Congress was discussing reparations yesterday.
Yeah.
I just wanted to think about shooting this down there and reminding them what Washington said.
Yes, this book that
I think a lot of them are familiar with.
Yeah. Well, it's been one of the hardest things for me to work on this book of black writings in the founding era, because several of the pieces I found have really sobered me up. Petitions in South Carolina in 1787 and 1789, immediately upon ratification. And the sad story in South Carolina is those were petitions protesting poll taxes levied on blacks. There were poll taxes when South Carolina was a colony, but they were on everybody equally. Immediately after the war, well, after the Constitution was passed and was being ratified, the South Carolina legislature changed the game and said there would be a poll tax on blacks, not whites. And 2 years later, they said, oh, by the way, we meant not just on black heads of households, on every person in the house. So a free black man paid a poll tax also on his wife and each child. And these black people were filing petitions, protesting the unfairness of this poll tax, and they were countersigned by whites. Each of them had between 20 and 45 white citizens saying, yes, this is unjust, don't treat black people this way. And South Carolina had the moment, they voted on it in their legislature. Think of the historical opportunity that was lost right there. So I'm wrestling with these because there's so much more than just these documents that speak to this tension.
You can follow the thread too, as soon as part of the Voting Rights Act was overturned by the Supreme Court, voter ID laws popped right back up.
Yeah. And there are these ebbs and flows in history. I think the arc is up eventually, I'm hopeful. And as David said so eloquently, we think back to dark moments, to Dred Scott. Who would have said when Dred Scott came down, that lawyer guy in Illinois says, I think I'm going to run for office because that's dreadful. and that 8 years later, slavery would be over after a civil war. I mean, it didn't feel that way in 1857. I'm not urging a civil war now. But, you know, there has to be long-term optimism, even if we have short-term challenges. There was a hand there.
I was just going to comment on the whole Dred Scott and how tone-deaf and ignorant the Supreme Court was at that time when they said, when Taney said basically a black man has never had rights that I need to respect in this country. And there's overwhelming evidence throughout the country that there were free blacks
Yes,
all the way up through that period.
yes.
And Lincoln called them out on it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's where the knowledge of these stories of individuals, the man who's the subject of 12 Years a Slave, Solomon North, was a free property-owning black in upstate New York who actually was a voter, but who got lured to Washington on the promise of a job, gets kidnapped and taken into slavery into the Deep South in whatever it was, 1842 or 3, and kept 12 years without being able to get word out. That's how precarious the civil rights of black people were. He was actually an enfranchised voter and property owner, and he disappeared from the face of the earth for 12 years before he could get back. So I guess that idea that Franklin offered after the Constitutional Convention, when he famously said to the woman who asked, what have you made? He said, a republic, if you can keep it. I was saying this to Leo in the car on the way out. You know, there are times when you feel like it is a little more precarious to keep the republic than we thought. Can't take it for granted. I think we should all go have lunch, and we can talk some more maybe there. Thank you all for your patience.